Hello everyone and welcome back to The Eradicators. I am your host, The Eradicator, and today in this video I will be reviewing a game that I have been watching every now and then, mainly due to the fact that I did enjoy its first iteration. I like the genre too, and I really like the previous work done by its developers at Ivory Tower, and that game is The Crew 2. So, what is The Crew about, you may ask? Well, The Crew is a series about racing as a team in a massively multiplayer environment. The idea of turning racing games into MMOs is not new and dates back to the early 2000s with Need for Speed Online and then Need for Speed Underground 2. It was then expanded into Test Drive Unlimited 1 and 2, which was developed by the team that has become Ivory Tower, and that made The Crew. The Crew revolves around three main pillars: its huge map, which is a loose recreation of the United States, and we'll talk about that later. The cars, which were rather limited in the first game and got a much larger roster in the second episode, and the races themselves. The first game of the series put yourself in the shoes of someone whose brother was killed by a racing gang, and the whole story revolves around the idea of climbing the ladder to then overthrow that gang leader who was responsible for the death of your brother, all while being monitored by the FBI at the same time. It felt very cheesy and not really credible, and the cringe was rather off-putting. Where the game really shone was when we had access to its free ride mode as well as the multiplayer. Getting to explore the huge map or simply drive as a regular car in the traffic in that recreation of the United States brought quite a lot of immersion and offered the kind of escapism that I am looking for when I play a video game. But what I found off-putting at most in the first game were the driving sensations. I never felt like I was connected to the road while I was driving the game's limited roster of vehicles, and at times I even felt dizzy driving over long periods of time. That is why, after finishing the campaign and playing a few races with my brother, I uninstalled the game, despite still having enjoyed most fun races with the AI or other people too. So, what about the second game? Is it any better than the first one? What does it bring to the table that the first one didn't? Well, it's interesting to see that it tries a lot, but it also fails where its predecessor failed, and here's why. I would say that the major difference between the Crew 1 and the Crew 2 is how the latter takes its approach to how players are immersed into the game world. While the first title solely focused on cars, the second brings motorcycles, boats, and planes on top of that. And the problem when you are trying to do everything at the same time is that you are usually good at none, and this is pretty much where the main problem of the Crew is. At no point did I ever feel like I was really driving a car when I played The Crew 2, and just like I certainly didn't feel like I was flying a plane, especially after having played Microsoft Flight Simulator recently. I mean, even GTA 5 felt more believable, and I also didn't feel like I was controlling a boat either. It all felt very arcadey, artificial, and thus killed my enjoyment. The only vehicles that I only really enjoyed piloting were the motorcycles, and guess what? I have never ridden a motorcycle in my whole life, and although I would love to cruise on a chopper bag at some point. And this maybe perfectly exemplifies what is perhaps the main target audience of The Crew: teenagers or kids, maybe young adults who have no or very little driving or piloting experience yet, still have the fantasy of controlling those vehicles. Riding a motorcycle and enjoying it made me realize this and entirely changed my perspective about the game. The Crew 2 is thus not a bad game as I previously thought. It is just not a game for me, a now middle-aged family man who unfortunately has grown up and is no longer interested in a certain extravaganza that I did happen to be attracted to 20 years ago when I was myself a young man. So, the driving or the piloting is arcadey, but it doesn't mean that it is all bad. In fact, despite that, I had quite a bit of fun in most of the races that I participated in, mostly because of a strong AI that won't hesitate to play dirty, take shortcuts, and will win races if you make mistakes. I appreciated that difficulty, which forced me to restart the races multiple times and provided me with a sense of pride and accomplishment when I finally ended up winning. Sure, driving a Mazda MX-5 did not help much against much faster cars, but nevertheless, I had fun, and this is what mattered, and that was already a major difference compared to the previous game, in which I was almost systematically winning all of my races against the AI, which very quickly ended up being very boring. Graphically speaking, the game looks pretty good for what it is. I mean, let's remember that its map is huge and would easily take you an hour to cross. I mean, at some point I thought I would drive from Las Vegas to Miami, and the game indicated that I would be driving for 56 miles, and these were real miles, not fractions, meaning that it took a long time to cross the US, and this is where I am making my point. Having such a huge map has a cost, especially for a game that was also adapted for consoles of the last generation, which is why, when it was released 2 years ago, it wasn't the prettiest of all the racing games. Forza Horizon 3 was much prettier than The Crew 2, and that being said, the game also has its moments, especially at sunset or at dawn when you are in the middle of nowhere driving on an interstate. It does feel believable, and for an instant teleports you to whatever part of the US you could possibly be. The game can also be ugly at times too. For example, for some reason, at some point it ended up snowing in the middle of Los Angeles, and boy did that snow look ugly. I mean, it felt more like thick bath foam than snow, and it just felt off. It felt off. I mean, snow in LA? Come on. In the end, I would say that the only thing that I found particularly bad in The Crew 2 was its cringy, cheesy narrative. I really wonder which one is the worst, the criminal storyline with the FBI of the first one, or the weird do-it-all would-be pilot whom everything is being handed to from the second one. Not to mention that the scripts were also really bad, with lines that are aimed at being cool but are just really awkward, and you've got the perfect recipe for another terrible first impression. After playing the game for an hour only, I ended up telling my followers on Discord how much of a drag The Crew 2 was, and fortunately, as you advance in the game, you get more freedom and you get less exposed to the overall ambience of the game, but when you do, the only thing that you want to do is to skip the cutscenes and just jump straight to the action. And if the single player action was just not good enough, there was also the possibility to play with other people, and I regularly met other drivers roaming around the states during my tenure. There were also plenty of available races against other players too. According to Steam stats, there are about 2,000 to 5,000 players who regularly connect, which could explain why the game didn't feel dead at all. Obviously, the title has a strong following of fans who encourage Ivory Tower and Ubisoft to keep on creating content to keep the game alive. So here comes the question that I've been thinking about for quite some time now. Is The Crew 2 worth buying 2 years after its release? Well, the good news is that there is a free demo on Steam which will allow you to play with no restrictions for 3 hours, which is more than enough for you to make an opinion for yourself. And I wanted to give a shout out to Ivory Tower and Ubisoft for giving this opportunity to potential players. It is also a tough question. The game still regularly gets new content. It has received a lot of new cars that players get access to without having to pay extra money. It offers plenty of hours of gameplay if you are not destroyed by its cringiness, and I would probably answer yes to that question if it was still not offered on Steam at a full price. Paying $50 for a 2-year-old game seems a bit excessive to me, and I would suggest you to wait until it goes on sale to give it a go. Then there is the other question that you may ask yourself. Is it a game for you? Now, after playing it for you guys, I came to the conclusion that it is now, but again, not everyone swears only by realism and authenticity, and there are plenty of players who just want to chill and have fun regardless how faithful a game is to the reality. And if that's your case, then yes, The Crew 2 may be for you. And that's it for this review, guys. Thank you so much for watching. A huge thanks to everyone who has subscribed to the channel. We started this channel 2 weeks ago and we are already well above 300 subscribers. You guys are absolutely killing it and we can't be thankful enough. See you guys next time for more content. This is the Eradicator. I'll see you guys later. This video is brought to you by the people who support this channel on Patreon and via the join button as well. Supporters of the channel get access to lots of cool perks such as access to my private Discord, your question answered in the show, you get to know when I'm going to play, and also you get to have a chance to influence the editorial line of the channel. Any help is appreciated, starts at just $1 a month. Thank you very much for watching. This is the Eradicator and I'll see you guys Later.